Good morning, everyone. Hope everybody had a great weekend. Good to be back in the capital city at 9 a.m. on a Monday. People chuckle at that. It makes me wonder. We're going to start off with the Department of Natural Resources this morning and Commissioner Williams, and introduce anybody that you feel appropriate. I'd like the committee members to know that we will be moving rooms this afternoon. We're going to try to get that on all your tracking documents on the top of it, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Commissioner Williams, good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I do hope everybody had a great weekend. Kicking off a fabulous week this week at the Capitol at 9 a.m. I'd like to introduce my Deputy Commissioner, Todd Holbrook. Because you all know I'm a little bit new to the budget process for DNR anyway. Here to assist me, I have Vonetta. Maintain law enforcement, public safety first, protect health and environment, keep our facilities open, minimize delays in permitting and other customer service, and fully leverage federal and other revenues. I'll be beginning in section 33. In most of my categories for my divisions, the first two items statewide changes, so I won't be referencing those. So my first division is coastal resources, 33-1-3.
That's page 64.
I'm sorry. 33-1-3, reduced funds for operating expenses will be a $30,559 reduction. This is for gas, supplies, and other miscellaneous items. 33-1-5, replace state funds with existing federal funds for personal services. This is for our fish population health survey position. That's a reduction of $54,183. 33-1-6, reduce funds for advisory group contract. We had, this is the coastal advisory group that we provided some money for. They don't have a lot of operating overhead. I feel like we can still maintain this group, but not to take that money back and save it $15,500. That concludes the coastal resources division down on the coast. Now move into the Department Administration, 33-2, that section. And I call your attention down to 33-2-5 for reduced funds for real estate rent reflect projected expenditures for a savings of $84,730. Right under that, 33-2-6, reduce funds for personal services and eliminate 3 positions. This is one additional vacancy from the FY 11 budget, self-retirement, and that's a savings of $216,220. We'll skip over to my historic preservation division. Again, the first two statewide changes. It brings us to 33-5-3. Reduce funds for personal services, eliminate 1 position. This eliminates 1 field admin position for a savings of $39,862. Down at land conservation, this is a budgetary group or a division that we're going to be moving over to WRD, and I'll show you in Wildlife Resources Division in a minute where we're going to pick up some money. But by moving that, there's going to be a net savings of $200,000 to the Department of DNR. It shows a $426,000 savings here, but we're going to pick up $226,530 in a minute when we get into WRD. That brings us to section 33-7 and parks, recreation, and historic sites. Again, the first two are statewide changes. 33-7-3, reduce funds for personal services to reflect projected expenditures and eliminate 24 positions. This eliminates full-time utility craftsmen and housekeeper positions and replaces them with 10 hourly positions to match peak facility demand. That's a savings of $650,661. 33-7-5, when we utilize those funds for capital outlay repairs, that's a savings of $492,500. And we just, instead of having a budget item for repairs and maintenance, we're going to bond that money. We're going to bond money for that. That takes us all the way Todd, if you want to interject there about, I know you got questions maybe about these retirement or risks and stuff.
Most all of these are retirement positions.
Is your mic on down there?
I'm sorry. Here's mine.
17 of those are retirement positions. Where this changed from the 11 proposal, that does add one full-time position in there out of our license and boat registration unit.
And then 3310-6 is where we pick up the land conservation division. And so there's an add of 226,530, but with a reduction of 426,530 from the land division, you'll see that that's a net savings of 200,000. In 3310-7, reduce state funds for leased wildlife management areas. This is we're projecting sort of a worst case scenario of having to not lease 25,000 acres or 15% of our wildlife management areas. We're optimistic that we will be able to work through this. Those leases are negotiated once a year. They're based on market conditions just like everything else, and we'll be starting on that probably April. Is that about right, Todd? Negotiating with our partners and that we've had long-term relationships with, and we're sort of planning a worst-case scenario there, but hopefully that will not be as bad. I'm optimistic about that. 3310-7, 33-10-8, reduce funds for operating expenses. These are just basic reductions for equipment and miscellaneous items of $142,929. And that finishes our operations. And if in the bond package, I'm sorry, I don't have numbers on mine, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I do. I'm in denial about glasses, Mr. Chairman. I'm 48 years old, and it's just, there we go. It's changing quickly. In our bond package, 50-2-3-45, bond 45, provide $890,000 5-year bonds. This is for our CAD systems for our law enforcement to finish those up. We've started that, and a lot of our officers have them, and we'd like to complete that with those monies. And then bond 46 is $6.5 million for 5 years for repairs and maintenance, mainly to our state parks. And I'll be glad to take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Members of the committee? Chairman Williams.
Commissioner, overall, what's the reduction in personnel? You cut quite a few. I know you said they were mainly for retirement. Are you eliminating any unneeded positions?
I know in our state parks, some of those changes are going to be just from full-time state employees to part-time hourly folks. But the overall, parks, but you're wanting to know how many people we're letting go outside of retirement.
Yeah.
Will we have to do any?
Yes, we will. There's the license and boat registration position that I mentioned is one, and then some of those parks positions, there's been some attrition throughout this year that may whittle that down, but some of those parks positions as well. I couldn't tell you at this point exactly when they're going to be. We'll get that. Yeah, there are some reduction forces.
We'll get that to you.
Okay, one other question. On the parks and all that we're privatizing, in your bond package, are we still required to maintain the structures and things there, or is that up to whoever contracts to, say, like at Veterans Park down at Cordele?
Yeah. That's a good example where Coral Management manages that. They manage the marina, the hotel, and the couple of restaurants there. and they're in charge of that. That we have a lease relationship with them, and so they're in a management agreement, and so we would be in charge of maintaining the rest of the park, the nature trails, the playgrounds, and that kind of thing.
So the golf courses and those sort of things, it would be up to the private, whoever you contract with.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Representative Allison.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. To follow up on Chairman Williams' question, you and I have had several private conversations about state parks, and your testimony here during the amended budget was that a lot of these positions in our state parks are now being filled by our friends of the state parks. With these 24 positions, are we still going to be able to adequately cover all of our state parks and keep those doors open and the maintenance going and everything that we need to keep the doors open on those? Is a grave concern to me. I'm the tourist capital of North Georgia with 5 state parks in my district, so I was just curious.
Yeah, and our Friends of State Parks has grown to 18,000 members statewide, and they do a tremendous service to us. They man the gift shops and everything, and we feel like that we may have to tweak some hours, as we have done since all this budget problem started in 2008, tweaking hours of operation and those kind of things. But I don't think there will be a noticeable absence of coverage with these reductions we're making.
Thank you. Chairman Hill.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, for all that you've done. Looks like you've done a wonderful job in paring this down. I have had several questions from my constituents. Actually, some of them actually do look through the budget. It's amazing. On the bonding package, could you tell us a little bit about the sad condition that horse barn is, that it needs to be retrofitted? They appear to be confusing this as a continuation of the past governor's horse barn in his county. And is there any distinction from this, or half of this from that project? Because my constituents were not terribly pleased about that, and it appears that this is connected to that somewhat, at least in the covering of the ring.
Okay, Mr.
So I'm trying to separate that so I can answer my constituents properly.
Okay. If with your permission, I'll let Todd handle the answer on that.
Yes, sir. I understand that, Mr. Commissioner. And Todd, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. You're referencing the 1.1 for the horse farm. And
Covering that new practice rate.
Right.
Yes, sir.
All right. That's actually kind of passed through from us through the Ag Expo in terms of what their needs have been, and we really haven't had that level of detailed involvement with it. So I can't really address what those conditions are. I mean, we can.
When you have an opportunity, if you get that information back to me. Okay, thank you so much.
And Chairman Hill, we'll see Ag Expo folks, I think, on Tuesday, so that'd be the appropriate time to ask about that. Representative Peake.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Morning, Mr. Commissioner. Tell me, and y'all may have chatted about this if I was a little late, what's the status of the golf courses, where we are, the state golf courses?
I'll jump in, and Todd can maybe give a little more historical information, but because of market conditions, we haven't had a whole lot of luck with our private partners in those. So we're operating some. They're still not operating at a break-even level, and I know you and I have had some talks informally about some ideas to do with those, and I think that's a good idea.
So it's kind of just a mixed bag right now. You got some of them that
That's
are
right.
privatized and some of them that are still being operated by the state. Okay.
Need some promotion on them.
Yeah. Okay. Just kind of curious where we are. Thanks.
A little follow-up information on that. Basically, we've gotten very close to being economically sustainable for the short term, by simply cutting down to the absolutely essential maintenance things. Obviously, that's not a good long-term strategy. At some point in the future, we're going to be faced with the potential of having those facilities be degraded by not having enough maintenance dollars put into them. But we're approaching that, making enough money to cover what our expenses are as of today.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. When you received a question about how many employees you don't have this year, how many you cut out of your budget. But in 2008, when we first hit our economic downturn, it was the Department of Natural Resources and EPD that took the first hit and took a huge hit. So will you give us more of a historic perspective of how many you've cut from 2008 to this year? We don't need the data now. It's when you do your research for the number of people this year, but do us 8, 9, 10, 11. So I think some of our agencies now are getting stiffer cuts, but you've sustained them for some time. And I think that would help us with the perspective of what you're doing.
Thank you.
Any other members of the committee? Let's talk about, if you don't mind, the bonds. I know that you had made a request for substantially more dollars to the governor's office, and you've already referenced that the third one is a pass-through from the Ag Expo. Are these, in order, your priorities?
Yes, they are. We have upwards of $121 million worth of maintenance work that needs to be done on our state parks. So it's not, doesn't get real difficult to prioritize, but we picked our emergency type stuff.
And if you if there was a number 4, what would that be?
Couldn't give you a specific project, but just to increase repairs and maintenance above this level.
Okay. Well, that actually was a perfect segue into my next question. Do you have a list of how you came up with $6,500,000, or these glasses, whatever? How do you come to that point? And
Yes, sir. We have a list, and is this? Okay, yeah. Well, that's the list.
And I'm assuming that list is numerical by dollars, so there's probably one other item that if that $6.5 million became $7 million.
Yes, sir.
Is that how it works?
We have a working list of need of
at the appropriate time.
priorities.
At the appropriate time, I'd love to see that.
Okay.
Additionally, I think this budget, and I appreciate what the Madam Chairwoman said about the reductions that you've previously made. But I do know that you've been asked to make recommendations on even potential more reductions. I think this reduction is set at about 7%. Do you have a plan on if we were to ask you for 8 or 10% where you'd go?
I know we do. Yes.
And can I get that?
Yes, you can, Mr. Chairman.
If you have it with you. If not, we can...
We'll get it.
Basically, yeah, actually, I think.
You want it now, Mr. Chairman?
You're fine. You're fine. But make sure we get that. Ms. Sarah can get that. Any other questions from the committee? Let me ask you this. If there's one area that was vital that you looked at us and you said, Mr. Chairman, I just can't absorb any more in this area or this area, where would that be?
I think we're in agreement, but our law enforcement positions.
Okay.
We've got them cut about as far as we can go.
Representative Peake.
Mr. Commissioner, just follow up on Chairman's question. Law enforcement, as far as I know, there's several aspects that you have. I mean, you have folks on the lakes. You have
yeah, they do. They fall into two main categories: our park rangers and then our WRD conservation officers. But
right.
It's our that's conservation. Our conservation rangers is where we're getting thin. We still have complete county coverage right now for all 159 counties, but it's stretching some folks and overlapping.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you. We're going to take a brief that you had, and we'll stay in recess for just that long, so don't move.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next up is the Environmental Protection Division. You'll find them on page 64 of your tracking document. And if you'd be kind enough, give us the rundown of who you are, name and title, and proceed from there.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate this opportunity to talk with you about our FY12 budget. My name is Jim Usry. I'm Assistant Director with EPD. Director Barnes had a meeting with the Governor at 9 this morning that he had to make, and since his regrets that he can't be here. With me today is Connie Buck, is our Financial Director, and also have Mr. Orland Kirkland, who works in the Director's office as well.
Thank you. So,
the Environmental Protection Division, I'll direct you to Section 33.3. The first couple of items there are statewide workers' comp and adjustment for the employees' retirement system. 33.3.3 is a carryover from our FY11 reductions with the additional of 3 additional positions, which would bring us to 15 to get to the 1.1 reduction, 1.1 million reduction. The only other item for EPD would be to skip over to 33.9.91, which is the Solid Waste Trust Fund, which is a further reduction from FY11 at 4%. This takes us to an 8% cut. In FY12, reduces it by $59,760, which will be a reduction of a secretarial position and operating funds. And I'll certainly be happy to answer any questions.
Members of the committee, let me ask you about these 11 positions. Have you actually eliminated those already?
Yes, sir. Those have been moved to federal funding, which means, of course, they no longer do the jobs that they were doing on the state side. That represents 3 retirements, 1 elimination, which was a dismissal, and that we didn't fill, and the rest were moved to other funding sources to do other jobs.
And you're currently, this budget here has a recommendation from members of the committee, I believe, of a 4% reduction. If we were to ask you about a potential 6, 8, or 10, do you have a plan on how you'd go get that?
Yes, sir. We certainly do. At the 6% reduction, that would be at 20 additional positions. At 8% would be 30. On up to the 10% would be represent a 38 position reduction. And that's personal services is where we would go to get that. It's really EPD only has about 21% state dollars, and that is where that money is at.
And tell us about the effects of each one of those. Tell us a little bit, for the members of the committee, what each one of those positions basically do. How does that impact what you do?
That would impact all of our programs, our permitting programs, water permitting, water compliance, solid waste, surface minings, those kind of things. It would hit all of our permitting and compliance programs.
In terms of delaying getting the permits?
There would certainly be some delays at that level of cut in getting permits.
Have you eliminated any of those positions up to this point?
We have eliminated that. We currently, for example, we have 1 person doing surface mining for the entire state. So we've tried to make our current cuts to minimize the impacts on permitting, but certainly cuts above that, there would be no other place to go than the permitting programs.
How many positions have you eliminated in permitting up to this point?
You do know that.
Find that out for me if you would. And
Yes,
additionally, since the argument is made that what that does is delay the permitting, do you have any statistical information that you can provide the committee on what kind of delay the previous ones have caused? Do you keep up with that?
Yes, sir. We track permitting timelines. I can certainly provide that to you.
Very good. All right, members of the committee, Representative Peete.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a couple of questions, so I'll try and keep them. Thank you for being here with us this morning. Help me out just a little bit so I understand the funding mechanism. I understand we get a lot of federal money. Is there any matching related to this? I mean, if we cut funding on the state level, therefore we get less federal dollars, or is there any correlation at all between the two?
Yes, sir. Our EPA grants require a 25% match, So essentially, cutting those state positions, if you look at it, the one elimination of a state position eliminates 3 federal positions.
So it's even related to
funding.
personnel cost. I mean, if we cut a position, we cut out funding from federal dollars.
Yes, sir.
Whatever the budget allocation is for, we reduce the federal funding if we reduce the state funding.
Yes, sir. We require a 25% match in our EPA programs, which is our largest grant.
Okay. Follow up. The permitting issue, I think I appreciate where the chairman was going with it, trying to find out that information. With the economic downturn, and we're seeing less development, are we seeing less applications for permitting for that would need an environmental permit as well too?
We have certainly seen a reduction in our environmental permitting as it starts to, in certain areas. I mean, certainly air permits have remained about constant because if you change a process, if you move, you will need an air permit. Our land disturbing permits, obviously with development as it is, are down significantly. We do expect that and it is starting to pick up a little bit more now, and so EPD will typically lag behind in getting those permits out just because the economy will be out in front of our hiring and what we can do.
Okay.
Just to kind of follow up on that, additionally, if Washington changes the regulations, then that can affect your permitting, which doesn't necessarily correlate with the economy.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
That's actually the next question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. I guess I'm a little confused or would like to ask for a little clarification and expansion on 3333. You mentioned that you were going to have, out of the 11 positions, 3 were retiring, 1 was a dismissal, and 7 were moving to other funding sources. Could you please expand upon that? Are their job descriptions going to change? Are they going to be doing the same thing? And what are the types of funding sources that they'll be receiving their compensation from?
Yes, sir. Excuse me. Their jobs will change. The funding that they're currently under provides to a certain job that we're not going to be able to do anymore. We're moving them to places. Obviously, our funding has a lot of strings attached to it, so we're moving them out of things like surface mining or solid waste management or erosion control, water permitting, into areas where we have federal dollars, which would be air permitting or some of our radiation programs, things where we get money from federal. But those jobs are lost and that service is no longer provided.
The jobs are lost?
Those positions, the actual function of that job is we're not doing those functions any longer.
Okay.
We have actually reduced areas to the absolute minimum level required. Things like small business assistance and other compliance programs that we've been able to reduce.
Okay. Are there any other external funding possibilities? Have you exhausted the ability to move other employees into other funding areas and still maintain some of those employees?
We have moved about everyone we can move to the federal positions to try to absorb the cuts. There's a practical limit to how many we can actually move there, and as I mentioned earlier, there is a match on those funds as well.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Chairwoman Smith.
Chairman, we had a testimony before our Natural Resource and Environment Committee last Thursday from the EPD director, and we were along these same lines trying to understand the role that we play as an agent of record for EPA. And I think it's something for us to keep in mind as we're looking at our policy. When we pass legislation here saying that we will be the agent of record for the EPA, that means that it is our state employees who will go into our businesses and manage all of our different requirements for permitting and such as that. There is a tipping point where if we move too far and cut too much, then we lose that agent of record with EPA. And that was emphasized to us very strongly at our last meeting. And when I was saying natural resources in 2008 started taking the hits, it was the whole area, and EPD also was one of your first agencies that was essentially put on the altar for CHOPS. So I want us to keep that in mind. What we could see is a slowdown in business, but what you don't want is to have this state have to rely on federal permitting processes when we can be the agent of record. Thank you.
Madam Chair, let me ask you if I may, and you're welcome to jump in here, that term tipping point, is that
Yes.
something that can actually be data-driven and defined? Are we at the tipping point? Do we know how much more room we have before we reach the tipping point? And how's that defined? I hear that kind of phrase in other areas, but I never know what that really means. Because I understand the premise, we don't do anything that affects federally, but
We need to be able to do our duty as an agency. That's the bottom line. When we agree to permit and examine certain things and we do not report that we've done that, then that is essentially how that record keeping is kept, so to speak. But I'm definitely going to defer to the ones who are in the field as opposed to your testimony.
Well, you're exactly right. EPD has given back the asbestos compliance program, TPA. We've been informed by EPA that they consider that part of our federal delegation and would like for us to take it back. They thought it was a short-term measure. It gets into, EPA is always available to overfile on companies in Georgia if they don't feel EPD is doing an adequate job. We, for obvious reasons, try to minimize the federal involvement in regulating our industry in the state. So it's difficult to quantify. I would say that the fact of us giving back the asbestos program, which is part of our air delegation, has certainly cause for concern with EPA. And they look at all of the states and determine whether or not we are doing this delegated program, and we have to be at least as stringent as EPA. So while I couldn't give you an exact quantification of that, if you look at our programs and how many people we have focused on it, those are the kind of things that EPA would look at.
right. I hear this. If we don't be careful, this is going to happen to us. And then I always ask, great, tell me where that is. And that's because we don't want to cross it. Mm-hmm. But we don't want it to be just a phrase. Sure. We need to have some kind of info on that. Anything else from members of the committee? Chairman Williams.
To follow up on that, how are we looked at by the federal folks about cutting? Are we at the point that we may come under some sort of scrutiny or enforcement from the federal level, the fact that we're not adequately providing the services that we need to under the federal guidelines?
We're certainly we're close to the line. I think the director who worked at EPA was the chief of staff at EPA. Certainly EPD has gotten a lot of credibility from EPA because of that. But we get to the point of they do come in and audit our programs and see the things that either get by or don't get by, and we get reports and we try to improve and shore up those areas. It's just one of those things where they come through and decide whether or not we're running a quality program. And as I've mentioned, we've already given back one program, which is unprecedented, certainly in Georgia, to give back any program that's been delegated. So in this state, when you have an asbestos problem, you have to deal with the federal government.
Representative Pete.
Thank you. Just a philosophical question for you. And I admit I don't know a whole lot about your agency and what you do, and so I apologize for the ignorance of the question. But do you guys see as your role? I'm a businessman, local businessman. Mm-hmm. Do you see it as your role to help businesses in our state to be able to deal with the federal regulations and burdens that we may have as business owners, or are you more of an arm of the federal agency to make sure that we are abiding by certain regulations? I'm just kind of curious do you see yourself in an advocacy role at times to help Georgia businesses?
Well, hopefully what we attempt to do is to help business in this state get the permits they need and facilitate economic development in the state. That is a core foundation. It's in our mission statement. We try to level the playing field and make sure that folks who do want to comply and do things right are doing things right, And we also want to help businesses be sustainable so that they don't overuse resources, but they do get the resources that they need. And we work a lot, I personally do, with economic development because we're in competition with all the other states on the environmental arena, not just for where new companies want to go, but where existing companies want to expand. EPD has to be able to deliver the permits that they need, and these are federal requirements, so wherever they go, they're going to have to deal with it. And so having EPD, who is going to be very responsive to the needs of business in the state, is certainly that is our goal, and that's what we try to do. We try to work with enforcement is the last thing we want to do. Sometimes it becomes necessary. We have bad actors, but in general, EPD works very closely with business to make sure that they get the things that they need so they can expand and grow when they need to, when they want to.
That's good to hear. I mean, I hope that's your approach because it's crucial to continue development in our state.
Right. I think certainly most businesses that you talk to in the state who've dealt with EPD would tell you that, and I certainly could put them in touch with you. Certainly, industries.
I've had to deal with them a few times when we've developed some property and have to deal with erosion control and stuff, and I understand the reason for that, and they've actually been pretty good.
Thank you.
And so, I just hope that would be the continued philosophy of the
yes, sir.
agency.
Appreciate that.
You just referenced the I guess audits was the words you used from EPA to let you know what Georgia's doing good at, maybe where we might need improvements. How often do they do that?
They do that annually.
Mm-hmm. Can this committee have copies of the past few annual reports of those audits so we can know what we're doing right? Certainly, if we're working on the budgeting process, if we're a little weak in one area, maybe that's something that we wouldn't want to look at, and that just kind of makes sense to me. And additionally, the question that was asked again, going back to that tipping point, and this is going to be almost speculation on your part, but when I hear of other states out there, Wisconsin, Illinois, and $6 billion, I've got to assume that those states have the same difficulty that Georgia has, despite ours only being 1.5 roughly. So I've got to assume those states have difficulty with their EPDs as well, and finding money to fund them, and so it's hard for me to imagine that. The speculation question would be: is Washington being overbearing, or are they kind of looking to give you a little latitude because they understand the position the state's in? Do you talk to other directors at other states to see how Washington's handling this?
Yes, sir. And the EPA has been understanding about all the states are hurting right now, and they do understand that. They have a certain federal mandate that they have to go through, however, but they certainly understand that all the states are suffering.
And do you talk to other states about best practices?
Yes, sir.
The percentage of what they get in the budget versus what we do in the budget, so forth and so on, because some of it is mandated. What are they doing in terms of that's in worse shape than we are, that we haven't even, the good news is we haven't even had to go there yet. What's the good news in Georgia?
Well, the good news in Georgia, and it may be largely because of the downturn in the economy, is that we are able at this point to keep up with the permitting. Companies are expanding here, and Georgia's environment is improving dramatically, even with expansion. We do have some challenges, certainly with the air, certainly with water. You know a lot of those already, but those are things that we are working through. And Georgia has abundant resources and a very good environment. So it's a place that people want to come to. And so we do talk with our counterparts. There's competition about getting federal dollars. EPD tries to get all the outside dollars that we can to improve things. But we all work together and model our programs. If someone's doing something better, we certainly want to go down that road.
Very good. Any other questions from members of the committee? Great. If you'll get us those audits as well as the hard numbers or something that we can wrap our minds around in regards to the 6%, 8%, and 10% further reductions if necessary, where we should look at taking that.
Will do. Certainly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Greg Griffin. Greg, I'm moving you up on my list because you're kind enough to be here about 10 minutes early.
Thanks, sir.
We pay attention to those things. And you'll find the State Accounting Office on page 15 for members of the committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. With me today is Deborah Stevens-Wilson, our Budget Director at the State Accounting Office. We are here.
Son who's having a birthday today?
Yes, I do.
Happy birthday. Take care of family first in this committee.
I understand.
Always.
Appreciate that. So just as a quick reminder of what we do at the State Accounting Office, we produce and issue the state's annual financial reports, both the CAFR and the BCR. We operate the statewide accounting and payroll systems. We prescribe accounting and internal control policies throughout the state, and we provide accounting and payroll services to select agencies through our shared services initiative. Regarding the FY12 budget, referring to the tracking sheet, we are one program with $3.8 million of state funds budget. The governor's recommendation, which is an 8% reduction, totals $269,000. The largest line item reduction on the tracking sheet is 11.1.4, which totals $292,000. As you know from previous discussions, 90% of the State Accounting Office budget is in personal services. So currently we're achieving the FY11 budget reduction recommendations. We are accomplishing that with FTE reductions through our shared services initiative. For fiscal year 12, we are prepared to support and operate the governor's recommended budget at 8%. We will accomplish that through, again, FTE reductions and attrition. And before you ask, any additional reductions that we take above the 8% would be FTEs, again, since our budget is primarily employees, and each 2% additional reduction would equate to 1 FTE in our agency.
Thank you. Members of the committee. Boy, that's fine. Representative Pete.
You say the state accounting, again, I'm learning this on the fly, so do you perform the payroll function for all the employees in the state?
We operate the payroll system, and we perform payroll services for about 20 agencies.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
And that's done in-house, or do you do that?
Yes, it is.
It's not, you don't use a third-party provider to do the payroll service? It's all done in-house?
It is in-house with our statewide system.
Okay, thanks. How many employed?
Got
any idea?
I do about 65 employees support the financial and payroll system.
Okay. That are totally dedicated just to the payroll system?
I opt to get you the number for
That's
payroll
okay.
only.
I'm just interested in an idea. Thanks.
65, roughly 65 that support the financial and payroll system.
How many total?
Total in the agency? About 110.
Get me from 65 to 110.
We have roughly 65, again, in the systems area. We have about 20 in our statewide accounting and reporting area, and the remainder which is about 15 in our shared services initiative, and the remainder is our executive admin area.
Yeah. If you would, just because I'm trying to get my mind wrapped around it, why don't you break those down for them in each sheet? Several sheets. I don't have to have it today.
Sure.
And you just said they do these various functions. Why don't you just give me a little paragraph or two of what specifically those job descriptions are and those functions, and that way we can use that for down the road. Okay. Anything else from the committee? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, page 16 for members of the committee. 16. For the record, for members of the committee, I don't know if our last guest said that or not, may have, but they're listed as an 8% cut. Yes. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Give us just a second.
I know Alan and I are both missing pages 51 through 54. Is that intentional or? Okay.
Probably. Well, for you it was.
I just gave you the sheets for these agencies and left out all the other ones.
Makes it easier to thumb through. Give us just a second.
Yes, sir.
Again, we're going to page 16. I trust y'all had a good weekend.
Yes, sir. Got a chance to go fishing with my son, so it was a great weekend.
Catch anything?
We did. Caught some trout on the Chattahoochee.
Really?
We did.
Good for you.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of worms you use?
No worms. No worms.
Y'all knew that was coming. All right, great. Page 17, and if you would, let us know who you are, who you got with you, and then proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to you and members of the committee. My name is Sid Johnson. I'm Commissioner of the Department of Administrative Services. I also want to introduce Sherry Southern, who's my Deputy Commissioner. Joe Kim is also in the audience. He's our Director of Legal Services, and I've got several other folks. Joe? Mm-hmm. And several other folks who are here for backup in case there's specific questions. It's a pleasure to present our FY12 budget to you. We have 6 program areas, and over the last several years, most of them have gone through significant changes, which you all have been a part of. And we've seen 2 things during that period. One, we've seen a shift from state funds to internal funding sources, and the other is we've seen a reduction in staff from approximately 240 to 150. The governor's recommended budget for FY12 seeks to annualize the 25% cuts that you saw in the amended budget, so there's no real deviations from the amended to this budget. However, I understand that the committee has some questions about the self-sufficiency of the budget and moving totally to internal revenues. So I want to address some of those issues as I go through this, if that's all right. As I've transitioned into this new role at the Department of Administrative Services, I've asked for analysis and planning to better understand our revenue structure and what some of the fees are and what the contingencies are related to those. So we will be working very closely with OPB and other agencies to figure out what new proposals that have been brought forward have an impact on our revenue structure. So today I can't give you any conclusions, but I would like to, as I go through our program areas, just talk about some of the issues we're wrestling with in regards to self-sufficiency. So if that's fair enough, Mr. Chair, I'll go through that. All right. In your handout, the first program area is mail and courier service. As you can see, there are no state funds appropriated to this area. We do charge fees to our customer agencies. You see we get about $1 million, a little over $1 million in fees. But at this time, the program is running a deficit. It is subsidized by some of our other program areas. So this is something we're looking very closely at. We are looking at an RFP currently to outsource this service, and we're wrestling with that decision right now. I have not seen the conclusions of that RFP process, but we'll be looking at that hopefully this week or next week. In regards to risk management services, the budget allows us to charge agencies premiums to pay current expenses and to put monies in the trust funds. Right now, we can handle the governor's recommendations. You see there, we asked for $92.8 million, and the governor's recommendation is $89 million in workers' comp. In general liability, we asked for $25 million and got 0. And in unemployment, we asked for 14 and got 15.5. We can handle these, the governor's recommendation. However, I would once again just raise a red flag that we're watching our trust funds very closely. They are getting down to minimal levels. And probably in 2013, we need to start looking at new infusions of cash into the trust funds. But for FY12, we're okay. Regarding the fleet management program, we did have approximately $158,000 in state funds. The governor's recommended budget seeks to decrease that, or actually eliminate those, decrease it to zero. We do charge agencies and local governments fees to participate in the fleet management program. Right now, the program is positive. However, it's positive because of the reserves that we've brought forward into this year. So without those reserves, we would be running a negative. So I would say it's internally not yet profitable, if that makes sense. And so we're still working at and looking at ways to make that profitable from a year-to-year basis. So revenues in this program are very important right now. Moving on to state purchasing. Again, there are no state funds provided for the state purchasing program. We're reliant on fees from the statewide contracts that we put in place, as well as rebates from the P-card program. There are several current proposals that can have an impact on the revenue structure, the revenues we get from these two sources. There are some other sources, but they're relatively small, so I'm just going to speak to these two right now. We are interested in providing more bidding opportunity for small businesses. That impacts our resources, and we have to go through more bidding processes to do that. So that requires some more resources, so we're scratching our heads and looking at what the requirements are there. And the P-card, we're working closely with the State Accounting Office at all of the procure-to-pay options and payment options, whether it's ACH, electronic payments, or P-cards, or checks. We're trying to get away from checks as much as possible. So we're looking at how that might impact our P-card revenues as well. Something to think about is local governments are very important, are an potentially important revenue source looking into the future. We do have some local government customers now. We'd like to get more. It's a win-win for them, for us, and so we are looking at those options as well. Surplus property, again, no state funds are appropriated. We charge participating agencies 50% of the value of the property that we dispose of or sell. The exception to that is very large ticketed items like airplanes and other items like that. We'll negotiate a fee. 50% would be unreasonable, so we negotiate that fee, a much lower percentage. And that program is breaking even right now. There are no revenues or reserves associated with that program right now. The final program area is the administration. Right now we have in the FY11 base $1.9 million. The governor's recommended changes is to reduce that by $351,000. That's a net amount. It includes staff reductions of 3 positions, which we've already done. We anticipated the change, and we've already made those reductions. The 3 positions were a director position, budget analyst position, and a payroll supervisor position. That 351 also includes some operating funds and some other smaller amounts. So that concludes the FY12 budget, and hopefully that gave you a feel for some of the issues we're wrestling with in terms of self-sufficiency as well.
Questions from members of the committee? Chairman Williams.
Morning, Sid.
Good morning.
Tell me a little about the surplus property. How much revenue was recognized from sale of surplus property?
Fiscal year 11.
Yeah.
I don't have that figure with me. Paulette, you don't have that, do you? The total sale?
why don't you just give us maybe a five-year backwards look at how much we've done in surplus property revenue over a 5-year period or so?
There's always been that question, and there's different ways that money is distributed. Some goes back to the agency, some is kept. Can you give us a breakdown of where those funds went?
We can, and we report that regularly to OPB, and we're going to start doing that with this committee as well. So you can see exactly where it goes back to the agencies, how much, and how much we'll retain as well.
Okay.
We did change that model this year. I'm not sure you're familiar with that. In the past, it was there were some agencies that received money back called funded agencies, and some agencies that did not. And in July of 10, fiscal 11, we tried to make that more equal across all agencies. So what we did the analysis, financial analysis, and we've been able to do 50-50, and that's what Sid mentioned in his presentation, the 50% fee. For all agencies now, it averages out about 50%. We look at it each quarter, and if it looks like, and what we want to do is cover our operating expenses. If we can return more to the agencies, we will, and keep less as long as we're covering, our expenses. And so far, for the first 2 quarters, it's been right at 50-50. We've given back about $488,000 to agencies through December, July through December of fiscal 11.
Okay.
And we have a report that we've given to OPB that shows which each agency has received, because I know that's been kind of an issue in the past of getting that money.
Mr. Chairman or Sarah, do we know that money that goes back to these agencies, is it included in their budget? Are they reflected anywhere along the way? No.
Not as a line item.
Okay. So we don't really know if they get a little extra money. We don't know whether we can account for it or not. Right. Okay.
Let me follow up a little bit there. That 50% /negotiation. That always makes me a little nervous. Why wouldn't I negotiate with you now that I know that that's there? And is there some agency that's getting 42% and someone else 46%? Do you have a standard that you use?
The standard is 50%. It's only the large items that are negotiated. And I don't think we do have a line, a threshold stated yet, but we probably need to do that and be very clear about that.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, Mr. Southern, glad to have you here this morning. Appreciate you being here. Educate me a little bit. I know you're still fairly new, Commissioner, getting your feet wet too, on the risk management. In effect, what you're doing is buying the workers' comp, buying the liability for the state, and then billing it out to every single agency to cover that cost. Is that correct?
I'm going to defer to Ms. Southern on this.
We're self-funded to a certain level, and then we have the excess insurance, and that's correct. We project what our expenditures, and based on the claims trend, our claims have gone down tremendously in the last 3 years. However, you've probably heard this story before. We have a lot of old claims that we've been unable to settle because we don't have the additional funding to settle old claims. And because of those old claims, with medical costs increasing and not being able to write off those liabilities, the cost of the program, like workers' comp, is going up, but our claims are going down.
Those old claims weren't covered in the excess coverage?
Well, they're just continuing. If somebody's hurt on the job, if it's a permanent disability, a permanent injury, we continue to pay that until, unfortunately, until that person is dead.
Or until you settle it.
Until we settle it. And we work with the Workers' Comp Board. There's a lot of, there's some criteria where you, certain types of claims where they want you to try to settle those claims, and we just have not been able to do that because we're pretty much on a cash basis with that Workers' Comp Fund. We watch it every week to make sure we have money to cover the current claims that we have to pay out. For example, we paid in the first 6 months of fiscal 11, I believe it was through December. It might have been a little bit earlier, but we had paid out about $34 million, give or take, in workers' comp, but only about $4 million of that was on current claims. The other $30 million was on the old claims prior to fiscal 11. Yeah. That's how critical that is.
Yeah, I've got some experience with a self-insured plan from years ago, and yeah, those claims eventually do get paid, and you better be reserving for it. I think you said, Commissioner, that in the risk management that you've been running a deficit. Did I hear you correctly? And so, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, okay, you're billing out for workers' comp and liability for every agency in the state. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you've got to determine, from an actuarial standpoint, I guess, what's the proper amount to bill out to make sure that you don't have a deficit.
Right. Our actuarial report from last June was about $441 million that we needed for workers' comp, and right now we have about, Paulette, about $14 million in that fund.
Okay, so I guess what part of the question I'm going to is, are we going to be looking at some significant increases to the agencies for workers' comp, for risk management cost in the short term?
For workers' comp, we feel like the $89 million will cover expenses, break even. But like I said, we watch it closely. The one trust fund that we had to have an increase in the amended 11 as well as in 12 is unemployment. Because of unemployment going up, they added $1.5 million, and we're watching that very closely, making sure we can cover that. That's a break-even fund. The other trust fund that we're concerned about is the general liability fund. Up until this year,
which is self-insured as well too.
Yes, and that fund has been okay. It has about $30 million, give or take, in that fund right now, but we spend about $30 million on claims on average. And we asked for $25 million for the fiscal 12, and we did not. The governor's office did not recommend that. Right now, we feel like we can. I believe I said that wrong. We probably have about $60 million in that fund right now. So we feel like we will be fine, as Sid mentioned, through fiscal 12. But in July of 2012, get my years right here, when we start fiscal 13, the general liability fund, if we don't put some money into that, we're going to have $0 to pay for general liability, and that's a big issue.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I can follow up one more time. I guess a twofold question off of that. One, are we evaluating? At some point, you may have to look at the decision of going fully funded rather than self-insured. Is that even something you're even considering and looking at? For one, and two, based on the information you just gave us. Do we need to be concerned that we have a solvency issue on some of these reserves for workers' comp and liability claims that the state is on the hook for in the future?
We have not looked at billing the agencies additional money for the first question, to fully fund. We try to base it on what our balances are, what we project the need will be, because of the economic situation we're in. Yes, we do have some concerns about workers' comp and the general liability fund going forward that we'd be glad to sit down and talk with you about and show you some of the details. That is a big concern. I know there's one state, I believe it's Wisconsin, that actually pays their workers' comp claims directly out of their general fund now through the Treasury's office, and we do not want to get to that point.
Yeah, we don't want to be Wisconsin.
No.
Well, I hope we don't.
Not for that one.
I guess my only encouragement to you, Commissioner, is, boy, let's make sure we are way ahead of the game on this thing, because what we don't want to be is in a situation similar to what we're like with Hope Scholarship, where all of a sudden the reserves are going to be depleted in the next 18 months. Let's make sure we are way ahead of the game, that we do not have an issue for solvency in this critical area for employees that are hurt on the job and for claims that we have against our state.
We agree with you, and we will look forward to working with you on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was curious about your statement about state purchasing and working with local governments, and I know that some local governments are trying to do more of a regional purchasing. I see that in school systems and such as that. How would your role interact? I know there's always a need for division between local and state governments, so I'm curious as to how that would work.
Yes, ma'am. We certainly don't get involved in local governments doing their own purchasing, and we don't do any policies or anything around that. However, they can participate in our statewide contracts. So if it's advantageous for them, price-wise, to buy through our statewide contracts, they're perfectly free to do that.
Do they know that?
Most do, some don't, and we're trying to get the word out.
Go ahead, Rick.
No, that was actually my question. How do they know in advance that this is an opportunity for them?
Mm-hmm. We do have a marketing program that we try to reach out to local governments and make them aware of it. So we've got several who are buying through it. We certainly want more.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I'm going to follow up on that. Again, is this something that we're the only state doing?
I would doubt it, but I don't know. Do you know?
I'm just using hypotheticals. If we're getting 8% local involvement, how would we not know that the national average is 15 or perhaps 4?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If it's something there that can save the local government dollars and benefits the state as well, I would encourage aggressive marketing. We'll talk about that.
We'd be glad to do that.
All right.
We are actually working with Department of Education as well for the school systems, because we know they have shown a big interest in that, and we go out regionally. Our marketing team does, from the different program areas, not just purchasing, but surplus property, fleet management. We try to offer all of our services that fit the local government, and we've been to South Georgia, Valdosta, Savannah, Columbus, Macon, and also in North Georgia recently to Rome. So we are really trying to reach out and working with, especially Department of Education, because they've asked us to work with them with the school districts.
I just would hope that we could see what a model of success is and whether we're at that goal. I think that's reasonable, and I don't doubt you got a salesman on the road or something, but I don't know how many cold calls he's making.
Not enough right now.
But that's the point, and frankly, he could tell you he's doing 10, and y'all might think, great, good job, and you have no clue that 20 is really good.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at that.
Mr. Chair, and it's not just in the purchasing area. We also have sales services in our fleet services and also surplus property. So those are opportunities as well.
Yes, they are. Chairman Williams.
On that, Mr. Chairman, I think some of your resistance for this occurs back in the local communities where your local vendors say, wait a minute, you're taking business away from me. Don't buy from the state. We want the money to stay in local. So it is a problem. I know that firsthand that's happened on several occasions. They want to deal with their local vendors.
Sure, and these are convenience contracts, so it's completely up to the local governments to make that decision.
And I don't doubt that. We've talked about that. I don't doubt that at all. But I just want to go on the biggest mistake a salesman makes is they don't ask for the order. If we got places we don't even let them know that they've got this opportunity, then I think that's short-sighted on our part. Let's talk about your P cards, and I can't remember, but I know we get a percentage of those fees, and I know a percentage of what's purchased. What percent was that?
It's 3% but it's the merchant fee, right? Okay.
Yeah. 140 basis points.
Right.
So almost a point and a half.
Yeah, give me a breakdown of that. And I also know that the vendor gets something as well. They get a percentage, and that's why we use them.
The vendor has to pay.
Pardon me?
The vendor has to pay the merchant fee.
Right, but how often do you renegotiate who gets that contract?
When was the last time?
It's just recently, a year ago, and then it's a renewal, 5-year renewal, so each year we look at that.
And you just renewed it?
A year ago.
And the reason why is because, I know it's obviously profitable for them, but just like the other presenter earlier talked about, in these economic times now, maybe we can renegotiate our leases. There's always a part of me before those kind of contracts come up. Maybe, that's something that we ought to look at, because a percent here or there can make a difference on that volume, right?
Yes, sir.
And are we locked in on that 5-year?
It's yearly.
It's a yearly. Each year you look at the renewal.
Great. Any other questions from members of the committee? Go ahead.
That's what we're here for, right, Mr. Chairman?
That's exactly what we're here for.
Property. Do you have staff that are on the payroll that do this, or do you use local brokers to, when you have properties? How does that work?
We do have staff. If there's large or specialty items like airplanes, we'll bid out for a broker to help us sell it.
But there are dedicated personnel solely for going marketing and attempting to sell these properties.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm going to have to get you the mic.
This is Joe Kim with the Department of Administrative Services. I just wanted to clarify, we don't sell surplus real property, it's just surplus personal property.
Okay.
So I wasn't
The
sure.
real property is
Does
not
not
handled by
come
you
through
guys?
us. No, sir.
At all?
No.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That is
Joe.
clarification.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And to follow up on Chairman Williams' questions again on surplus property, on the disposition of funds, you said you keep what are your percentages and the others passed on to the appropriate department. Are your funds that you kept in-house to pay expenses rather than put back in the general fund?
Yes,
That's
sir.
correct.
Okay, and you said you're at about a break even. Is there any way that you could slightly increase the sales price? I mean, your base in the budget is $1.2 million, and slowly decrease that base so you become totally self-funded. I mean, right now you're running on a break even, but that's including a base of $1.2 million from the state. Is there a way that division could actually increase their profit slightly, so over a period of years you could drop that to where that would not be an expense to the state, and it would be a true break even? Would that not be a goal to attempt to attain?
That's not state funds, it's other funds, that $1.2 million.
Well, we're allocating it out of our budget here, right? So are we not? It's showing
Sarah,
your base of $1.2 million. I'm trying.
It's just other funds, and it's basically our expenditures for that program area are about that $1.2 million. And so that's how we determine if it's 50-50, 60-40, whatever that break even is when we sell an item, and we keep the amount of money that it cost us to, the fee that it's costing us to sell that item on eBay or gov.deals, whichever way we go to sell that item. That covers our expense, and then we just return it's about 50%, we turn the rest to the agencies. But it's other funds. It's not, we don't have any state funds in that program.
Well, it's showing that we're appropriating $1.2 million. I guess I'm a little. Where is that coming from? So this is all other outside funding from state agencies?
Yes, sir.
And that would be the monies that you're taking in from the sales?
That's
your
correct.
your profit end of it?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Let's talk about the mail and courier service. I think you said that you're running a deficit.
Yes, sir.
How much is that deficit?
Paulette, do you know the deficit about? It's less than 100,000. I don't have that exact figure with us. It's,
And do you have a line over the last 5 or 10 years of how many years you've run a deficit?
yes.
Can you get that to me?
Yes, sir.
And what's your plans on ensuring in the future you don't run a deficit?
Well, as Sid mentioned, we have an RFP in process right now to see if it's one of those services that would be cheaper for agencies, because what we do is we put mail, postage on mail and courier. And so we're looking to see if we can do that cheaper with an outsourcing.
Let me ask the obvious question. Last year you would have anticipated you run a deficit, or did it surprise you?
It was not a surprise.
Okay, then why didn't we do that last year?
We did. This is the second RFP we've gone through. We learned some things from the first one that we should have been a little more clear on. So we're doing our second RFP, and much more thorough, and we have a better RFP now, evaluation to actually we're able to balance apples to apples. Before it was not a true comparison, and so we have that now. And we're able to, because of some of our other funds, we're able to subsidize that right now. But going forward, we know we have to make some kind of changes there.
Okay, since we were able to learn that in a 2-year curve, does that mean that next year we won't have this problem? The apples to apples, we'll go ahead and correct it in 2 years to make sure that doesn't happen next year?
It's my intent to correct it now as soon as possible, and it's part of this analysis and planning that I've asked the agency to go through.
Okay. Now, you said you get your money there from the fees. Tell me about those, because there's a part of me that goes, I don't know, maybe we wouldn't have that million. Fill in the blanks for me.
For mail and courier, and maybe what we do is there's not a fee added. Well, I guess there is a fee to provide the services that we provide, but we charge for the mail. We have a discounted rate on the mail because if we buy the postage in bulk, and then we add on a fee for our services of placing that postage on the mail, and then we provide courier services where, as you know, the U.S. Post Office will only deliver to one spot. For example, in the Twin Towers, they won't deliver to each floor in each office. So we provide that courier services around the capital area to deliver that mail.
Is it a matter of the fees just don't equal the deficit for 2 years?
Part of the issue is we probably were not aggressive enough in increasing our rates to the agencies over the years for postage increase is where some of this deficit actually came from. And now, because of the situation that the state's in, we have not increased that fee because we know agencies don't have it. So we're trying to look internally. We think it should be outsourced. We really think that it can be done cheaper outside of DOES as a third party. And so that's what we're looking at now. And if that doesn't happen, as Sid mentioned, we're going to have to look at it again, and we're still analyzing that now.
Chairman Hill, and that zero-based budgeting is always a part of me that goes, why do we didn't recognize it's cheaper to outsource 2 decades ago or,
yes, sir,
or 10 years ago? I wonder why we think that way, why we're forced during bad economic times to go, is there a better way?
Mr. Chairman, can I have a slight follow-up on that?
Sure, you can have it now.
Okay, it kind of ties right into that, because you mentioned the Twin Towers and the way that the mail is done by courier. In most large businesses, there is a large set of boxes built, if you will. The post office delivers it there for every suite within the Twin Towers. There's no courier having to be provided. It's a one-time expense of building the boxes. Has that ever been considered as a trade-off to all this courier? I mean, that's an ongoing labor expense, where on the other hand, the post office will put it in all the individual boxes. Then all you have to do is have an assistant or somebody walk by the boxes with the appropriate key, pick up the mail for their department, division, or whatever, and there is no courier cost and all the employee costs associated with the person running around.
Someone in their little job description walks over once a day.
Yeah, and then there's no really external cost ongoing, just the one-time cost of building the box.
That's a legitimate thought, and it's something we need to look at, and we're going to do that. We're going to look at these options.
Because if we do come to zero-based budgeting, and I've met with two groups that already have, 2 departments, and that's the type of thing they're looking at. They're looking at costs and saying, okay, what does this person do? Why do they do it? And is there another way to get to accomplish the job rather than the other way around? And we're finding that, well, we really don't perhaps need couriers. We can build a box, one-time expense. It's all over.
Yep.
That's just for an example, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Get some boxes built.
Yeah, that's right. I'll get the lumber.
Thanks. Talk about airplanes for a little bit. Y'all provided some good information here. I guess this is from you on the Georgia Aviation Authority.
Probably
Is it,
from
that's an attached agency.
Are we going to talk about that separately? Okay. So I'll defer.
Questions from the committee? If we have to look for, we've asked everybody this question, additional, where do we need to look? Just think about that. Jot something down. Come see me. Let's just talk about that. We want to do it in the right place where we don't cause any long-term damage.
All right.
And we got another question from Chairman Williams.
On the certificate of need, we don't hear much about any requests for certificate of needs now. Where do the 41,000, is it it's not state funds or total? Where does it come
Is
from?
that attached as well?
Yes, that's an attached agency, and what happens, the certificate of need, when I believe it's a medical facility, and Joe, you may have to help me out here, wants to open up a facility, they have to get the certificate of need, and they have to pay for that, and that's where the funding comes from. And in DOS, what we do is we just collect the money, and then over at the community health is where that office is held. They actually then, I think, pay for that money goes to pay for the services that they provide.
Anyone else? Thank you,
Thank you, Mr.
Get
Chair.
that information from you.
Yes, sir.
If we're going to take a death nail somewhere, perhaps let it be in fire safety versus insurance regulation or agents licensing, for that matter. I'm not really sure if I can speak to the logic that was behind the submission at the time, Mr. Chairman.
Well, if I took, for example, fire safety at 4.3 million, and insurance regulation at 4.9, and just rounded that up to 10 million, and I says, golly, we got to find 2%, 200,000, and I took 100,000 off the top of each one of those. What's the downside to that kind of simple logic?
Well, I think the downside at the end of the day would be that we're going to be doing less inspections that we're required to by code. We're going to have less people able to cover the whole state. As I understand it, those inspectors right now, we've got those 20 inspectors, and they're covering every inch of the state. So it's going to put at least a significant delay into the pipeline as far as getting timely inspections. And I know that affects the home manufacturers when they're getting licenses, when they're building their homes. And I realize the economy's been down, so that industry may have taken a hit. But at the same time, we've got the installers. There's over 500 installers in the state that are having to be inspected annually as well and licensed. So it puts a tremendous strain on the ability of the agency to accomplish the mission in those areas.
Would it be easier for us to say, instead of suggesting, would it be easier for us to say, you got to find us another 200,000 for 2%, and you tell us where you get it?
I don't know that it would be any easier. I think either
Work
way.
with me here. I'm trying.
I think either way, we're going to be in a tough spot, and certainly we're going to work with you, Mr. Chairman, and you know that. We will do that. Whatever is needed and asked, we're going to do that. I know I speak for my boss here when I say that, but
let me say one thing, Mr. Chairman. The manufacturer.
I'm listening to this right now.
Okay.
Not that you're not interested, but
okay. Well,
go ahead.
The manufactured housing industry is really down, and I don't remember how many plants were there in Georgia. I know we're down to like 4 that are still operating in Georgia. There was how many? I think it was more. I think it was like 12 or 15, and they, due to the economy and a lot of the local regulations that prohibit the use of manufactured housing in their counties, they've gone down. Now we still have to do quite a few inspections because these 4 that are left are running pretty much full time, but it's going to keep us from having to run from Waycross, Georgia to Monticello and all around the state, and we're going to be a little more efficient. So that was one of the reasons that we wanted to take it out of these inspectors. But.
Very good. Any other questions from members of the committee? Representative Mills.
Commissioner, on your inspectors that go around the state, do they pay for themselves through what they bring in from inspections and fines? Do you know?
I can't answer, but I'm getting a negative response over here from my chief of staff. It works to defray this cost, but but it's not. I mean, it's not optional. The federal government says that if they're going to have these manufactured housing, they don't have to comply with local building codes. They have to comply with federal building codes, and it's been given us, as the fire safety commissioner, the responsibility to conduct these inspections.
Right. I assume if they're out of compliance, they're fined or they're.
Yes, is what I'm being told, and if they cannot, these this unit, or each of them are expected as they come down the line, and until they get the stamp that they're approved for sale, they can't go out. So we don't allow them to go out into the market that don't comply with the federal safety standards. Thank you. We through?
Yeah, you're through.
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, I'm going to skip over the generic ones such as workers' comp and telecommunications and the retirement systems. And if you look at the remainder of the budget, it's tied to our human resources. And as you'll see in our customer service support, there's 5 positions that are being eliminated there at 0.4 and 0.5. And license issuance is the main area of operations that you're most familiar with, and that's in 20.2.4 and 0.2.5. The first one's an elimination of 13 positions, and the second one is 33 positions. That's kind of a carryover from the amended cycle. And if you remember the amended cycle, we talked about that we had already instituted moving 4 of our centers to part-time. And I'm sorry?
20.2.25?
20.2.4 and 20.2.5.
You said 13?
The first 20.2.4 is 13 positions, and 20.2.5 is 33 positions. Okay. And I was talking generically together since it's both in the license operation. In the amended, the 13 positions is carried forward to the out year, and that was tied to 4 of our centers moving from full-time to part-time, and 1 of our centers at the Shannon Mall location, as a result of the landlord closing it down, prevented some others from going to part-time. So that center there in Shannon Mall closed as well. As we continue to move forward with the 33 additional positions, we'll be looking at how do we incorporate potentially additional part-time centers, potentially up to 10. We haven't negotiated out what we can do through attrition versus what we're going to have to do as far as job sharing those positions and how close the centers are. But that will move us toward at least 3 more part-time centers. In regulatory compliance, let me step back to license issue. What's also in that area is our citation processing unit, our call center operation, our help desk for the center as far as when someone's going through a problem driver pointer system where they're tied up in another state with a suspension or something of that nature. This is the majority of our operation. When you look at our $56 million budget, this is close to $49 million of our total budget. So I just wanted to point out that is the grit of what we do. The last program is regulatory compliance, and that's where we regulate the driver education programs, the risk reduction programs, chauffeur license, things of that nature. The first item, other than the generic ones, is 20.3.3. That is to eliminate a position. 20.3.3 is a small reduction in personal services. 20.3.4 is to eliminate a position. That position is carried forward from the amended budget. We are going to do with 1 less field operations analyst than what we had. What we used to do is we audited every program every quarter. We went about a year ago to a risk-based audit program as recommended by the Department of Audits when they came in and looked at our operation. What we do is every program we have gets 1 full audit a year. If we have problems in that audit, then we go back on a quarterly basis or more often as needed in order to get those problems corrected. So we're doing that with less positions, but we're also focusing on those that are the offenders in that area. To give you a little idea of that budget's comprised of $1.3 million, of which half of it is self-funded for a motorcycle safety program, and that is one of the few programs that we have internally that the monies come in and we do not send the monies to the general fund. It self-funds itself, and that's the motorcycle safety program. The remaining amount goes toward the function I just mentioned, which was auditing these programs. The other thing that's often asked is our operation. We typically bring in the fees that we operate right at $60 million. So one of the things that we're proud of is that we actually fund our operation, although we send it to the general fund and then come back before your committee to justify our expenses. But I do just place that out in front of you. That's one of the things we kind of measure ourselves by. Are we funding our operation, and are we justifying the monetary needs before you as well? Mr. Chairman, I'll stop there and answer any questions you have. And
Mr. Allison.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate all the hard work you do. Just for my curiosity, how many active driving centers do we have in the state?
We have 64 centers.
And of those 64 centers, how many are currently operating at part-time or not full-time levels? If you have that just offhand, I was curious.
Yeah, I'm gonna estimate. I believe it's 8, but I'm hearing 7 here. I'll have to confirm that answer for you.
And you just testified that if we had to make certain cuts, you may have to make more of those centers part-time?
Yes, sir. We're trying to keep them all open because one of our goals is to have a 30-minute drive maximum for our customers. So our first goal is to keep them open so that we can meet the needs of those customers. But as we continue to lose positions, we have to negotiate whether or not we can fully staff them to operate full or part-time. And we've decided that we can better serve the customer if we have full staffing there when we're open versus being open and not being able to really serve that customer.
Because that was going to be one more question, Mr. Chairman. That was going to be a lead into my next question. If we are losing 33 vacant driver examiners positions in FY12, these part-time centers, are we making them so that examiners are having to travel back and forth between part-time centers, or are we making these folks part-time employees?
We hope to do a little of both.
Okay.
So the answer of where we stand today is what you stated to begin with. They're having to travel in order to handle this change in operation. We're trying to learn to recruit because we do use some part-time folks, but we do not use a tremendous amount of them. But we're hoping to recruit and base kind of off of a banking type of employment process where we have a mixture of part-time and full-time staff so that when peak demands come, we have additional staff there, and when the demand is not there, then obviously we don't have to have the part-time staff there. But currently, we're basically making folks job share and travel between centers.
Thank
you. Let me ask you, I'm assuming since you do the 30-minute, not far from 30 minutes out, that some of those are going to be in less dense population-wise. Is that the first ones you look at in regards to your part-time?
Currently on part-time, we've gone mainly by demand. And so we've put a list on, obviously we serve on average about 270,000 customers a month. And so we've put our centers by demand and where they're visiting. And obviously we're trying to get the lower impact centers, but not lose them in those areas, and job share between those.
Right.
And Representative Allison's familiar because his was one of them, and we hated to do that, but I think we're doing the best we can at the current stage.
Well, again,
yeah.
I understand, and people understand times are hard.
Right.
It's all relative to how long you have to wait and so forth and so
Right.
on. But, if you're open Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and people can go get their driver's license without waiting 6 hours.
Right. What we've done in most of the areas is we've basically tried to go to a 10-hour work day so that people can come after work or before work, and we're open 2 days in one center and 2 days in another, and job share those employees. Okay. The other thing we're trying to do is Tuesday is our most frequent our busiest day by far, and we're trying to make sure that we can handle the demand on those Tuesdays at the centers that are getting overridden by demand to keep that number down. We are struggling in some areas. We've I think I testified before you last time that in September we had over an hour wait for the max wait time. But the neat thing is we're down 100 full-time positions, and I mentioned we use a lot of temp people, not necessarily part-time, kind of the same. But if you look at all of those, we're down about 200 agency-wide. And the average wait time is 22 minutes on the state. And we changed the system a few years ago from where we were only measuring the time that you walked into the front door till you got to the front counter. And then we made you sit back down and get back up and get your picture made. Last November, over a year ago, we went to a one-stop shop. So once you're called to the window, we complete your full transaction. And when you leave that window, you're actually leaving the door of the building. So when I say a 22-minute average wait time today, there's a potential that you stood in line to get your ticket, so it may not be 100% of your full wait time, but it's pretty close to your full wait time. Whereas 3 or 4 years ago when I said, we have an average of 10 minutes, it may have been a 30-minute wait because we weren't capturing the full process.
Chairwoman Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know the percentage of people who actually renew online or by mail, and has that helped at all your numbers as you're looking at essentially making the process easier?
It is helping, and what I'll say is we have a new initiative that just went live December 6th that I'm going to come back to in just a second. Unfortunately, over the years there, we have not seen a dramatic change in the number of folks coming into the centers versus renewing online. It's been about 2.7 million people coming in person versus about 500,000 folks going online. Now, what we have done here recently, and it's been driven by trying to make sure that the customer served, but also by budget, is we've come to a more customer-friendly approach to online services. We did 2 things. One, in the old days, we mailed you a PIN number or a RIN number, as we called it. And if you tore it up, threw it away, and tried to go online, you couldn't do the service. If you called us, we said, sorry, it was mailed out of an outsourcing group. We don't have that number. You're going to have to come see us. The first thing we did is we changed that to where you can do like any other entity, your bank account or anything. You can go on and set up a customer profile with DDS. We will email you your password just like any other business does. And if you lose that password through security process, we can send you that password again. It also gives us something that we didn't have before is when you create that profile, you can or cannot, but we ask you to give us an email address or a phone number. Because one of the things we didn't have, everybody thought we could do it if we needed, for example, when snow came and we had all these road test reservations, and we need to call and say, hey, we need to reschedule you because it snowed and there's ice everywhere. You'd think people wouldn't come, but they still show up. We had no way to do it. Or when the Shannon Mall location shut down that day, that was overnight. The power was turned off. We were notified at 10 o'clock that evening that we weren't going to be operational. Well, we had to stand outside because we couldn't get into our own facility that day. We had to stand outside all day and say, we're sorry you drove out here. We've asked these other 2 locations to work you in today. So we're creating a profile account to help us provide better customer service. But what it also did was allowed us to add additional services, getting to your question. And one of the biggest things we've seen, the number one reason people are suspended is because they fail to pay a traffic citation. We call it a failure to appear. The court send us notification that you hadn't paid your ticket, we suspend you. It's a $90 reinstatement fee. But most of the time people have that license in hand. All they need to do is pay the courts their money and then pay a reinstatement fee to the state. Well, we were making them come see us. Well, we now have that online. Once you pay the court and are released, you just go online. It's reinstated automatically. We've also opened up, if you need for your job purposes, a certified MVR. You can get a certified MVR via the web. It does have to come through mail. You can do multiple services. In the past, we were siloed. We had several services, but if you need to change your address, renew your license, and get a new ID, you could only do one at a time. You had to come in and change your address, wait 60 days for it to fully process, and you can go in and renew. Then you come in later and do it online. Now you can do all that at one time. So we launched that December 6th. Rob, I'm going to ask, was it 13,000? 15,000. We just looked at them this morning, and I went blank. Since December 6th, services that we did not have available and people would have had to come back into the center, we've done 15,000 people. So we, not a tremendous amount when you look at 270,000 people come in on a monthly basis, but we also haven't advertised it well yet. We're just now trying to get the word out. And so we're making headway where you're asking. The other big thing is my call center. We have the busiest call center in the state of Georgia on an annual basis. Revenues is busier on a short period. One of our largest call volume is reservations, like I just mentioned. And we do not have a web reservation system today. So you have to call in to set up a reservation to take your test. We're releasing an RFP here soon, and we hope by next year to have a web reservation system, because my 50 call center reps are just overwhelmed. Right now we've got about a 3-minute wait when you call in, which is unacceptable. If we can divert the volume from calling in for reservations, we can provide better service because they can change it, they can cancel it, they can do all these things. But we can also open up those phone calls for folks who have difficult questions on a suspension or reinstatement. I'm sorry, I'm long-winded. I get excited, Mr. Chairman. I apologize.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your answer.
How many employees do you have?
We're authorized 809. The current budget takes us down to 689, and the 809 was after the amended. We lost a total of 169 positions. Most of them were vacant already. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Page 82, Secretary of State. And on deck is drugs and narcotics. Don't giggle.
Members of the committee, appreciate you having us today. Got a handout that'll kind of go over my presentation. Certainly wanted to thank the committee and you for your help in the 11 amended budget on a couple of issues that we had. Unfortunately, we're kind of in the same boat in 12 as what we had talked to you about in the amended budget. And I think I wouldn't be doing my duty as Secretary of State if I didn't talk to you about a few of those things, because I think it's something that is important not only to you all as legislators, but to the state in general. And I didn't want to take up too much time, but I did want to talk about just a few things that are affecting us. We continue to believe that we have about $230,000 in statewide cuts that we have documented that are being that are just unrealistic recommendations, mainly the telecom figure that OPB came out with. In 2012, that impact's actually going to become greater because GTA and OPB believe that the billing to support the statewide voter registration system mainframe will decrease by almost $190,000, even though we go through reapportionment and the presidential preference primary this fiscal year. And historically, when we've done that, the mainframe costs have actually risen during that period, and they're saying that they're going to decrease. So we do not agree with that. Doesn't seem like we've gotten much reaction to it, but I understand why. The 12 budget also requires that we eliminate 2 positions that are intake specialist and a licensure analyst for nursing and a board support specialist for pharmacy. These positions have a direct effect on fee revenue collection and can also delay the issuance of licenses, which keep Georgians from working and from being in the employment field, therefore paying taxes. And then lastly, we got the $40,000 reduction in the board per diems, which means lesser licensing board meetings, which will result in fewer opportunities to get bad licenses off the streets and fewer opportunities to license those who may have issues with their applications. And when I say that, it's just 2 days ago I got a call from a representative that was complaining because they had a constituent that had failed to pay their renew their license. Well, then they missed the 30-day kind of window we have for being late without getting you where you have to go through the reinstatement. So they missed that, and now they're having to wait for a board meeting to approve their license. And this is somebody that's been somebody that hasn't had problems. They've had this license for 20-something years, but the law says if you don't renew and you miss the renewal, extended renewal deadline, then you have to go back before the board, and the board has to approve you. Well, if we don't have the money to have board meetings, then they can't get approved by the board. So you can see how this not only affects people getting licensed, but it also affects revenue to the state. And I think that's my biggest message to you. We are not here crying about our budget, because we can handle any cuts that you give to us. And I don't say that in the wrong way. My point is, we will make do with what you give us, but there are implications. We're going to have problems producing the revenue that we normally do. We're one of the few agencies in the state that is a revenue producer in a big way. And when you look at in June of this year, when we have nurses that get finished with school and they want to get their license to go to work at the hospital, and most of them have jobs, well, if we don't have the funds to have board meetings and we don't have the support personnel down there to process the applications, instead of getting them licensed in 20 to 30 days, it may take us 60. Well, that's all right, but it does two things. It delays them getting into the workforce, but then it also delays the revenue collection that we would have got this year and puts it into 12, which then all of a sudden, we're not generating the revenue that OPB and the state is expecting us to generate, which causes us problems. And I think that's, why our point has been, if we could just have a few. Commissioner Hudgens left his glasses up here. Just those four or five positions that are $35,000 to $40,000 a year positions. If we do have to lose those, it's going to cost the state money, and it's going to increase licensing times. And we're quite honestly, have spent the last 3 months, I think, trying to educate the legislature on what we're doing, how we become more efficient. I know Chairman Peake came down to Macon to see our operation and see how we have streamlined. But our point being is, we're at the point of diminishing returns now, where we don't have any other efficiencies that we can get that will help us keep our licenses times the same and help us produce the same amount of revenue. And we can live with that. We just want to make sure that next year, if we're not, if we're producing $1 million or $1.5 million less than what we're accustomed to, that is why. And the whole GTA cut is something that I don't want to complain about. But if you,
Mr. Secretary, I've assigned a subcommittee to look at those various licensing boards. As you're aware, we talked about that a little bit, and I gave them the charge of looking at efficiencies that doesn't affect negative revenue. But I got to ask myself, and again, I don't know, and that's why we're going to do this, but if you've got for the benefit of the board, if you've got a committee, if you've got a beautician's board, a barber's board, and a nail technician board, I think you got those three or maybe two of them, I can't remember. And they're all meeting once a quarter, and there's 7 members on each one of them. Could that not be done with 13 members, meeting monthly, and we save $2,000? Those kind of efficiencies. I mean, I don't know.
Right. No, and I think that's a good point, Mr. Chairman. We're actually looking at some of those things right now. There has not been a person or an agency that has been more for regulatory reform than myself. We supported the GORC legislation last year, where it says that every board that regulates or licenses will come before the committee once every 7 years. The Secretary of State has a designee on that committee. We, quite honestly, have been the ones that have been pushing for those meetings to start being held, and we have some ideas. But I think we also have to be careful of the example you gave of, sure, if we combined boards and had more board members and more meetings where they could do more work. I think you also have to remember, these board members aren't getting paid. the per diem basically covers their travel expenses and mileage. So
I appreciate you bringing that up. And again, that was just one example, and that's the exact reason why we want to call it out. But that's an interesting, we're talking about the licensing of nurses, and they're not paid. Well, there's another one that you might want to look at. Well, if we're paying per diem for 11 people to meet once a quarter, which is delaying our nursing licenses, is it possible that we could have one paid position and two part-time that issues the licenses more frequently? And if somebody wants a license fast track, perhaps there's a higher, instead of, there's a higher, you want yours because the example you gave, Mr. Secretary, was the person who missed his window.
Right.
No, that's not our fault. That's their fault.
Absolutely. I agree, and that's exactly what I told the representative that called me, but they said that we were a bunch of government bureaucrats not getting her license. And I said, well, we are, but we're following the rules that you and I probably, when I was in the Senate, implemented. And, so that's.
So I just say that as a way of, for everybody's benefit, that we're looking at several different models, that we don't want a nurse not to be able to practice because she waited 90 days. So that's something that we'll be looking at. We've got Mr. Peake.
Secretary, are y'all looking at doing telecommunications conference calls for some of your, to avoid kind of the per diem cost and be able to maybe do it quicker?
Yeah, and actually that's a good point, Mr. Secretary. We have already been doing that. I think we've been one of the agencies that probably has done that first. As you know, because we had moved the operation to Macon, we started having where the attorney generals that have to attend our meetings, they all do that by teleconference, so they're not spending 2.5 hours driving back and forth to Macon for those meetings, so they're teleconferencing. We do many of our board meetings by teleconference, but they're just, there are board meetings where the license holder, if there's been a cease and desist, if there's been a fine, if they don't agree with the findings of the board, where they have the right to appear before the board, and when that's the case, the board has to convene in person whenever we can. We are doing teleconferencing.
Well, I know you are, and we like having you come in person so you can come by Cheddar's while you're leaving Macon. But let me ask
you, Secretary, as well, and I'll be off a little bit, so give me some wiggle room. But I know in the amended, we funded something like $100,000, which was an ad, I think, to give you a $2 million drawdown and some kind of federal election kind of things.
That's correct.
I'm starting to get stories that may not hold in the Senate, or you may not any longer be interested in that. Give me an update on that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, and we appreciate that help. We certainly appreciate the help on the archives building, which I think all know we just got put into a bad deal by prior administrations that we've been dealing with. The 100,000 in elections is not something that we knew was coming. It will allow us to draw about $2 million federal dollars, but from my standpoint, had I, my number one priority would be to potentially take some of that or even all of it and have those people at the licensing division, because if you're giving me 100 to draw $2 million for elections, which would be nice to have, but I don't absolutely have to have it, and don't necessarily need it in elections because we have our maintenance of effort agreement. That's one of our problems. We can't take any budget cuts in elections because we risk losing the millions in federal dollars that we already have available in accounts that are specified as to what we can spend it on, like voting equipment. But what I'm worried about is if I don't have the people I need in Macon, I'm going to lose $1.5 million or $2 million of revenue that we normally produce. So to me, having 100,000 in Macon to produce licenses that get people to work and generate that $2 million, not that it's new money, but it at least keeps us doing what we're supposed to be as far as a revenue projection, versus having $2 million in federal money to buy some voting equipment. My priority is licensing, putting people to work, public safety, because we're doing investigation and writing fines on people that are doing unlicensed practice, massage therapy stings like we've done in Macon, and Sandy Springs. So it wasn't that we didn't appreciate that funding. We just, would prioritize it in a different way, and we're, open to working through the process with the House and Senate.
I guess
on that.
I saw it to members of my committee as a drawdown.
Yes, sir. And it absolutely is.
Chairman Williams.
Mr. Secretary, I noticed in all your departments you're eliminating vacant positions, and you're showing cuts. Are those positions now being funded?
Well, I think some of the positions we have are held on purpose because we were trying to see what our budget was going to look like. Actually, the governor's recommendations of, I guess, doing away with all the, I'm not sure the right technology, but those positions that were being held, actually our count in the Secretary of State's office is 17 lower than we currently have, so they don't have our numbers right. But like our positions in Macon, our cut on on page 82 at the bottom under the professional licensing boards, where it says eliminate 7 vacant positions. If that's, we're okay with eliminating 3 of those. Those other 4 are the 4 that we're saying we need to maintain what we're doing now. But we have not filled those because we're waiting to see what the budget was going to.
So you've included their salary. The thing is that if they're not vacant, I just make sure we're not putting that in the budget as salaries.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the positions are vacant because we've had people left or retired, and we just didn't fill them trying to see what was going to happen this year. But we need those people. But we didn't want to. Isn't that right?
Yeah, these are all part of our cuts in the amended budget. So
right.
These are carried forward. So we had a plan to meet the 4, 6, and 8. So we enacted that plan. Part of that was letting people go, but that was back in October time frame. So we maintained that position vacancy while we wait out the budget process.
Yeah. Well, my concern is if they're vacant and we're not paying a salary, any salaries on that, why would we show it as a cut? Looked like it'd just be a washout.
Well, it was part of our recommendations. I mean, we couldn't fill it if we knew it was going to be part of the cut.
It is a cut from the continuation budget.
Okay.
But it's not like we're spending the money. I mean, we may have that money at the end of the year, at the end of 11, that we'll give back. But we didn't want to just hire that position back and then 6 months later have to turn around and fire that person. I mean, it didn't make sense for us to do that. If we could wait 2 or 3 months and see what the budget looked like.
If it's built in the budget already, I don't know how to say this. Is there 20 of them in there already built in? Is there 30? How many's built in total? Is that all of them? You just said they were built in the budget and we're going to give it back now as a cut.
Yeah, like
You have additional ones that are built in that we don't know about? Additional vacancies?
No.
I don't think so. I mean, like, people leave every day.
I mean, I'm just sitting there going, the incredible odds that these would be the only vacancies.
Well,
people leave every day.
Right.
And so when that position becomes vacant, we do a couple things. We look at it. Can we do it better? Can we do it more efficiently?
Can we do without it?
Yeah.
Which saves that money.
Yes, sir.
And then you give us that money back as the cut.
Yes.
So what I'm asking you is, I get that, which was her point. My question is that it's hard for me to imagine, whether it was a Secretary of State's office or anyone else's, that the exact number of vacancies, we're going to hold that position to see what we're asked to do, which is what you said. I guess what I'm asking is, how many of those other vacancies do you have out there that you're waiting to see what we're going to do?
Well, I mean, we can get that number for you, but I would just tell you this. When you look at our budget right now, like in archives, we're already closed to the public 3 days a week. Our building and our rent and our utilities and overhead for the building is 62% of the budget. So, you know, if we take another 4% cut at archives, that really means we're taking 4% over 38% of the budget, which is more like a 9 or 10% cut. We can't take any cuts in elections. So if we get an additional 4, 6, 8, or 10 through the agency, we got to make that up somewhere else, either through administration or through securities. Our securities budget has already been cut 49%. Our administrative budget has been cut 43%. So when you kind of take out archives and elections, all the cuts that we got left to take are in really just 4 things. So if we have open positions, it's because somebody retired or left and we're having to hold out. Because I will remind you, like I did in the 11, you know, our head count is down almost 30% in this agency. I would challenge you to look at anybody else in state government. So if we have an open position, it's because we're waiting to see, because we are literally at the point of diminishing returns.
And I don't doubt that a bit, and I appreciate what you've done. You've taken a tremendous hit, but for the members of the committee, I just want to make sure that we've got our minds wrapped around what's happening here.
And
if someone leaves in the middle of the year, in a lot of agencies, they're not filling that position, and then next year, if we're asking them to make a cut, they'll go, okay, well, let's just go ahead and give up what we've already haven't paid out in a half a year. Right?
And I certainly understand.
I mean, that's the way it works, right? We'll offer up what we hadn't filled anyway.
Yes.
Right.
But that's one of the things that's so frustrating about the telecom cut to us is we had been doing all these things proactive like you should be doing to prepare for times like this. And then we, you know, excuse my language, get screwed by the GTA cut.
Right.
I mean, because you can look on the second page in your chart, and, you know, the archives division cut is $53,000, and our corporation's cut is $15,000. Well, in corporations, we answer thousands of telephone calls a day. We have a call center there. Our archives building, we're closed 3 days a week to the public. I mean, how can that be? How can there be that much difference in that? And that's what's so frustrating to us, because people say, well, you got a $24 million budget. How can $50,000 make that much difference? Well, when it's 2 people down in Macon that are opening, 1,500 pieces of mail a day and processing those applications, that's huge for us right now.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Okay. Thank you.
And as part of the attachment, we've got the Commission on the Holocaust. Drugs and narcotics on that. We're on page 83.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. It's nice to see you. We're looking at the same document that you are, and there's really not much that I can say other than I think this exceeds 7.5% cut, but we understand we have to do our part. And I'd like to know if any of you have any questions.
I've got it listed for the purpose of members of the committee right now. It's right at an 8% cut, so about 0.5% over what.
Yes, sir. And in the 11, when it was across the board 4% for everyone, we didn't understand why we had to take an 8 or higher. It hurt our little agency quite a bit, and the teachers we serve in the area. But
you had mentioned to me about some efforts that you were looking at in regards to acquiring some maybe private funds or your federal
yes,
funds.
sir.
Why don't you spend a few minutes telling us how that's going?
Okay, we are trying, and the private funds that we acquired had to go to the Anne Frank exhibit that's actually the world's largest in Sandy Springs. We're the only state that was ever granted this exhibit, and so those private funds are now going to fund our part-time coordinator who works along with us. We work, we work 7 days a week, but the exhibit is open every day except Monday. So to take up the situation for the cuts, every one of us works on the weekends. But that's what we're here to do, is to serve the public, because everyone can't come during the week. but we are trying very hard, and actually the state funds go only to provide for administrative purposes and our regular operating. When we do our programs, every one of the programs is funded by private money, or we're not able to do it. So when we come into your district, we come to your constituents for help in bringing such programs. And so far, what we offer is in demand, and the communities and the kids get out and raise funds so they can have these programs. We deal with the lessons from the past, but we deal with the current issues of the day, and as relates to character education and good citizenship, and the turmoil in the world today, and how to live in this world better. But we are
Have you
raising.
seen an increase in the amount of private funds that you've been able to raise?
Not yet. We are trying. We're doing emails. We don't do mailings because we don't have a cent for postage. So we phone calls, mailings, ads, looking for volunteers. That's the same as money for us too. If we can get volunteers to help us do things that the staff has been eliminated does. But we're trying, and we're looking into if the possibility exists of a private fundraiser, but it's hard to find one who will only work on the promise of a percentage, but that's all we can do. But we are taking your advice very seriously.
Thank you for that. Any questions from members of the committee? We appreciate what you do.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Allen, how are you? Well, we'll try to get you out of here, I guess.
Oh, no. We're over at another hearing. Go ahead, sir. You're more important. If I don't please you, I don't.
Tell us about your budget. Page 83.
You're just basically taking away 2 agent slots and some of our telecommunications, and I believe it's the workman's comp. And we're just like everybody else. We can't take the hit, but we have to do what we have to do.
You did have some funds added for motor vehicle purchases?
Yes, sir.
When were they added?
I don't know. They just showed up.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
I'm not going to complain about it, but I'm
I'm
glad they got
I understand. How many vehicles does that give you now?
Well, we've got 2 approaching 170,000 miles, so that would just be replacement vehicles. We got probably 12 vehicles.
All right. Any questions from members of the committee?
No, I can't think of a one. No, y'all are being too nice to me. I would say, in Secretary Kemp's benefit, the pharmacy board passed a rule last week that goes into effect March the 9th, and they're going to start registering pharmacy technicians for the first time in this state, and that's going to be approximately 20,000 technicians, and that's going to bring in, we're figuring about $50 a piece, about $1 million between now and the end of the fiscal year.
How many investigators do you have?
Right now?
Yes, sir.
Counting me?
Yeah.
10.
You're as good as 3 of them.
I'm good as 3. Well, 2 of us together make one good agent. There are 10 of us, including myself. We're down from.
What do you do with the other 2 vehicles then?
They're just sitting there right now. We got the oldest one sitting there, waiting hopefully to hire some people. We're not paying. We're not paying to have the oil changed. We're not paying for gas. They're just sitting there.
Insurance?
Probably, yes, sir.
All right. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members, I'm fine, thank you. Hope you all. Okay. We have reviewed the proposed FY12 budget, and we can make it work this year. It's going to be real close. Taking what our projected revenues are, which are, by the way, decreasing every year because of we're getting a lot of licensees that are lapsing. But as the numbers look right now, and assuming we have nothing unusual to happen, I think we can make it. To refresh your memories a little bit, we do service or have a little under 100,000 licensees that we're dealing with. And so about 1,000 files, open disciplinary files. And the bulk of our people are doing investigations. And so in order to keep sort of the pipeline moving, with the funds that we have now, we're okay. But if it's cut next year, yes, it does. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us how much? Well, yes. You said 1,000 cases. How many of those, what percentage of those, you get those numbers, what percentage of those are revenue producing or just technical areas? You ever break it down in various categories? We do have it broken down. It's broken down as to cost reimbursement, which comes to the commission, and then fines and penalties. The bulk of it is cost, which is retained revenue, which is why we can make it work. If we didn't have that, we couldn't make it.
Reduction of any kind of staff, does that reduce the amount that you get coming in off of your operating expenses or your fines and your?
Well, it would just be a slower process. These citations are going out every day practically. And, you know, if you slow the investigations down, it'd just naturally be.
Have you ran any data on how much you've been slowed down so far?
Well, so for the first half of this fiscal year, in retained revenue and costs, we've increased from last year. It's been $166,000 for the first half. So that we're thinking that'll put us on track for $300,000 for the fiscal year, which kind of covers the gap between what we spend and what we're appropriated. But it's due to using a more minor disciplinary action called a citation and only sending the most serious cases where the person deserves to be revoked or severely punished to the attorneys. So it's more cost efficient to do the citations because they're in-house with the investigators.
How much a year does that revenue bring in from citations, fines?
Last year it was in the $200,000 range. This year it should be close to $3 million.
And the only reason why, and I know it's a much smaller scale, I don't want to micromanage it to death, but it's the same thought process for members of the committee that we had with the Department of Revenue, where maybe if we gave them more.
Correct.
All of a sudden you got all excited when you looked at boy, the whole attitude changed.
No, Mr. Chairman. One thing I have to tell you is Commissioner Rogers is an attorney with a fine mind. We're in Budget 101 at the commission because I didn't handle budget much under the former commissioner, so Kristen's been great as Secretary of State, but some of the concepts only click in. But yes, if I had four more investigators doing citations every day, then that number would go up, and we wouldn't need to be.
The frustration I have is we see people out there that say there's dollars out there, and when we start asking, well, tell us what you've done in your model to change it to help with that, maybe it's not as good as I perhaps might like it.
Well, the citation process has really helped on the revenue collections because that's a fairly new concept and something that the commission is doing a lot more now, and it's a lot quicker, same amount of money coming in as and less costly than going to an administrative law judge.
It didn't exist at one point. You either got a letter of finding with no disciplinary, or you went before the judge and they asked to take your license. That doesn't really reflect the practice, which is full of medium mistakes.
These are fines against real estate agents that have...
Yeah, go ahead.
Agents and appraisers, yes.
We have a complaint process where a member of the public or another government agency turns in, says this person has violated the license law. We have an investigation. If it's meets certain criteria, we send you, the practitioner, a one-page saying we have this case, this happened, here is the amount that you pay. We usually combine that with education, which we do underwrite, because we have some free courses that we have through a recovery fund that we do use. And then they pay the money back. If they feel like it's unfair, we have a review process. If they totally feel like it's unfair, they can go to a hearing.
And again, the reason why I just want to make sure we're as efficient with these models as we can possibly be. We heard about how well the state could do earlier if on a workman's comp, if we were buying some of those old things out and $15 million up front for $60 million. Earlier we heard from someone that you want to sit there and you go, well, golly, if someone misses their deadline, you know, if they want to pay double for their license to get it reinstated within 2 weeks. And these are the kind of models that we don't hear agencies talk about. Different ways of looking at it.
I've got 4 vacant investigator positions I'd like to have, and my understanding was we couldn't hire for them, so we haven't.
All right, we may be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
And ethics. Transparency. And this is going to be found on page 83 and 84.
You saved the best for last? Okay.
Give us just a second. We're dissecting everything we've learned today.
That's fine.
Well,
Take
not
your
everything,
time.
but let's pass that down. And I said page what?
83.
Thank you.
And 84.
Thank you. All right, we're ready to begin.
All right. Chairman, I've handed you, at least one of the pieces of paper I've handed you was the same that we brought to the first meeting that we had with you, and I have supplemented that with some explanations of our electronic filing systems and why we need the additional programmer we've been asking for.
Was that the $90,000?
That's the $90,000.
Is that right, 90,000?
Yes, that's very good. And as you are aware, or maybe you are aware from the last meeting, we have sustained, the Ethics Commission has sustained a 42% budget cut just since 2008. We have 9 open positions. We are only asking to fill one of those open positions, and that is for the software programmer, which we feel is so critical to keep our operations running smoothly so that those that are required to file with us, including yourselves, can file and can get that information out without having any issues. I'd just like to mention that I was listening carefully to the gentleman who was representing the driver services in Georgia, and you were asking questions about electronic efficiencies. Well, not to pat ourselves on the back, and I can't even take responsibility for this because I've only been in this position for a year, but I believe we were way ahead of the curve with regard to electronic efficiencies. We have taken, as you know, over 1,000% increase in our workload in the past year due to the new campaign finance law, and I don't know too many state agencies who could do that with 10 employees and 4% cut in their budget, an unexpected 4% cut in their budget, and still have programs running. So we have wrung just about every efficiency we can into our system, and we're still here. That being said, what we are most concerned about is this 1,000% increase in our workload, and as you can see from the papers that I have given to you again, we have 3 people taking over the job of 881 filing officers throughout the state. And that does not include the vendor lobbyists that we may or may not see. There's currently some legislation out there that may decrease the number of vendor lobbyists. We welcome that. However, we will still be registering vendor lobbyists who are now just becoming aware that they should have been registering with us, and we're trying to get the educational efforts out there. We truly believe that for us, and if you look at the second handout that I gave you, and I have the head of IT, Reggie Boswell, here with me, and he can answer any questions that you have, but we are having difficulty sustaining our systems without an additional software programmer. Currently, Reggie, who is also the IT director, is also the only software programmer we have on staff. And we had a contractor for a while, but we've run out of funds. And the contractor is no longer with us. So we can't continue to make the changes that we so desperately need to make. During the lobbyist registrations, I had to take half my staff, including myself, just to get the lobbyists registered. We couldn't do any of our other work. Both lawyers on staff were out there registering lobbyists. My entire IT team was out there registering lobbyists every day. If I do this every year, we are never going to be able to get our other very important work done, which is to make disclosures to the public, as well as to audit files, as well as to provide education to all of our filers and everything else that we do in the increased workload. So as you can see, if you want to take a look at the electronic filing systems, we run 5 electronic filing systems. These electronic filing systems, we can't just go in and do a few quick fixes and make them work for 1,000 or more % increase in our workload. They need constant maintenance. We also have a lot more changes that we need to do to become more efficient. I would like to add a credit card payment system for everybody who has to make payments to ours. That's going to take a lot of software programming, a lot of planning. Next year I won't have half my staff trying to register lobbyists and doing nothing else for a month and a half. We also need to, we're continuously making modifications to our system due to changes in our law, due to bugs we find in the system, continuous maintenance of our database systems now that we've had such a huge increase in our workload. If I have missed anything, I'm going to ask Mr. Boswell to speak to that or to answer your questions. But we will not be able to keep up at our current budget with our current staffing if we don't get some help. We are heavily, heavily dependent on IT. That is why we are so incredibly efficient and can do what we can. But we do need additional assistance. As you know, I've also asked for funds for the GETS program because we trying to maintain our servers and the responsibility of maintaining those servers without a disaster recovery program is not something I want to see the Commission go through.
Chairman. Thanks, Stacey. You got a yeoman's job ahead of you. We know that and recognize that. And
thank you. I appreciate it.
Help me just understand. So I understand kind of your perspective of what you see your charge at the State Ethics Commission to be. Is it more of a proactive position of investigating issues that need to be addressed, or is it more of a reactive position of when a disclosure problem has been brought before you? I'm just kind of curious of what your perspective, what you think the Commission's charge is.
That is a great question. We would I would very much like that to be part of the Commission's responsibilities. Right now, we just don't have the staff to do it. We have one auditor on our staff. We don't have any investigators. We used to have 3 auditors and 3 to 4 investigators on our staff. I'm not asking to fill those positions because right now I understand we are on terrible budget constraints, and I am just trying to keep this commission surviving. I'm just trying to do those things which we are absolutely required to do, which is provide disclosure to the public. I cannot be proactive. It is very difficult. We can only pick on the most serious cases. Everything else pretty much falls by the wayside at this point.
Very in a reactive position now, just because
Absolutely.
of budget constraints. But do you see the charge of the commission, if it were to be funded, to be in a proactive position of?
Certainly, sir. As a matter of fact, it's required under the Act.
Yeah, that's okay.
I mean, it is required under the Act that we actually audit all of the files that come in. We can't possibly do that. We're looking at electronic means for doing that to catch certain mistakes that that the computer can catch. But you know, right now we are only in a purely reactive position. Without those investigators and auditors, we can only react to what's given to us.
Okay, thanks. Just curious.
No problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, we can't predict what we're going to do this session, but I fully expect the vendor lobbyists to that portion to go away, the 250,000 filings that you estimate here. So is it from a filing standpoint, you're anticipating an additional 61,000 registrations this year over last year?
Yes, sir.
What's the dollar magnitude? So therefore, what additional revenue do you anticipate coming into the state based on that?
That's a good question. Right now, we do not charge for any of the filings.
Excuse me, I meant
I'm
more
sorry.
the lobbyist registration. Then we
Oh,
know
okay.
that the things that you actually generate fees or would generate fees.
Well,
for.
currently we've collected, and I apologize. This should have been updated. This number is a little over a week old, but currently we've had about $350,000.
Well, I heard that was in January, but I'm just trying to get an idea of
February. Things really slowed down.
Okay, so we saw a very high increase of revenue and workload for that, but you anticipate that tapering off for the remainder of the year?
We do just the registration of lobbyists, but as soon as elections start, I mean, that's really what we see as our main purpose, is to make sure that all of the other filers, all the candidates, all the public officers, all the financial disclosures that are made with us, those are going to kick in very quickly.
Okay. I guess what I'm trying to get to is just, is there any estimate of additional incremental revenue because of the way we've the new registration process?
There would be a great incremental revenue if we were going to include all of the local vendor lobbyists, but since those seem to be up for the House Bill 232, for cutting under 232, I would probably not anticipate a great more deal of revenue. You know, we have discussed this before, not before you, but I would love to see our division become a little bit more of a revenue producer. If we were to charge, I don't know how you all feel about this, and this is up to you, you're the policymakers, but if you were to charge nominal fees for doing filings with us, such as the insurance department charges, as well as many other state agencies charge, maybe $15, $20 a filing as a processing fee, we would be a much greater revenue producer. We could certainly pay for any of our additional costs. If you were to take 61,000 filings and multiply that by 15, I believe that comes out to something like $2 million. But if you, 68,000 filings, which we anticipate, say just a $15 fee, comes out to about $2 million.
Thank you, Chairman Hamilton. I'm going to get my mind around this, and it's unfortunate we hadn't gotten together and talked a little bit. But earlier you said something that kind of caught my mind, which was, with Representative Peake's question, something like with all these 61,000, it just kind of works us so much that we can only look at the more serious offenses or allegations.
Well, we look at everything that is brought to us, and if something really serious comes to our attention, if we catch something really serious on our own, we certainly go after it.
And I understand that, but because of the other workload It keeps you from being able to dig in as much as perhaps you would like to.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, that said, by extension, if we have an individual, just hypothetically, of course, that has filed over 200 ethics complaints against folks, well, wouldn't the same logic apply? That kind of stuff also keeps you from being able to really, I mean, time taken away is time taken away. Am I illogical there?
Well, no, you're not illogical at all. As a matter of fact, it's a great question because last year the legislature put language into our statute that said that for frivolous suits we may charge attorney's fees, which I know the commissioners are going to do and which we have already stated at commission meetings that we will do. And plus...
How much have you collected so far?
Well, we can't collect any. We couldn't collect anything before January 10th, and whether that applies to cases that were filed previously to January 10th, I'm not sure that we can do that either. However,
hold on, because you're going to say something, you're going to get my mind going. So
okay.
Let me fill it in. So let's suppose for the moment you just said you don't know if you could do that. Is that because there would be a lack of a bill that we've passed?
No.
Or is it interpretation on your part?
It is a potential interpretation on my part, and I've spoken with the Attorney General about it, and I'm waiting to get an answer back.
So could you possibly need clarification from us?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so. No, sir.
For legislative intent?
I suppose it's really a matter of whether a law can apply retrospectively.
Okay.
And that really is not so much due to any language that you put in the statute. However, one other thing to remember is if, and I know which gadflies you're speaking, if they don't show up at the commission meetings, we may also dismiss or charge attorney's fees. So if somebody is not serious about bringing a charge, then they will certainly pay for it. They have to show up at the commission meeting, they have to represent themselves, or we can charge them attorney's fees. So I believe that you did a very good job last year.
Here's the fine line. If something's wrong, let's fix it. Okay? But if someone's, what'd you say, gadflying? Was that what you?
Yeah, probably an inappropriate term.
But and I don't even know what that means, but I'll look it up when this is over. But yeah. If they're just dancing on the periphery, and you're too intelligent, too busy to have to worry about that, and I get that because you are. Well, I also can't help but wonder. A couple of years ago, I remember when we did have an investigative arm that were looking at things like purchasing $39.95 flowers to go to a funeral that the Ethics Commission was looking at. Why isn't that just as peripheral as someone else filing? I mean, help me understand that.
I cannot explain the actions of my predecessors.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for the lady? We appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you.